Good morning, everybody. This is the spring edition of Morning Gym, during which we will try to get through several poems. I'm not feeling very poetic this morning because I went to the barber shop yesterday for the first time in several months, and I needed it. But this young lady barber who smiled a lot asked me, "How do you want your hair cut?" And I gave her very thorough instructions, during which she was sort of absent-mindedly looking in the mirror. And I thought, uh-oh. Anyway, she gave me a very thorough haircut. In fact, there wasn't much left on my head when she was finished. And I had specifically told her, do not cut the hair on the top of the head. It's okay the way it is. Well, she went after that with a vicious purpose, and she was pulling it, and I was leaping around in the barber's chair. It was quite a show. I felt like I was in the hands of Sweeney Todd, the cutthroat barber who is in T.S. Eliot's poem, and it was actually pretty scary. By the time I got out of there, I left her a small tip, mainly because I was still alive. So that was my experience yesterday, and I hope it hasn't affected my mood for reading poems today. I try to pick poems that might be timely for various reasons. I thought about starting off with T.S. Eliot's poem that begins, "April is the cruelest month, mixing memory and desire, etc." But that is getting a bit overused, so I thought I would choose another poem that has a theme that takes place in the month of April. And this is a poem by Crowe Ransom, no relation to me, as I've pointed out in the past, that I think very nicely sums up what might happen this month. It is a storm-centered poem entitled Miriam Tazewell. Here's the book from which I'm reading it, and it turns out that it's the very first poem in this edition of selected poems. Okay. When Miriam Tazewell heard the tempest bursting and his wrathy whips across the sky drawn crackling, she stuffed her ears for fright like a young thing, and with heart full of the flowers took to weeping. But the earth shook dry his old back in good season. He had weathered storms that drenched him deep as this one, and the sun, Miriam, ascended to his dominion. The storm was withered against his empyrean. After the storm she went forth with skirts kilted to see in the hot sun her lawn deflowered, her tulip, iris, peony strung and pelted, pots of geranium spilled, and the stalks naked. The spring transpired in that year with no flowers, but the regular stars went busily on their courses. Suppers and cards were calendared, and some bridals, and the birds demurely sang in the bitten poplars. To Miriam Tazewell, the whole world was villain. The principle of the beast was low and masculine, and not to unstop her own storm and be maudlin, for weeks she went untidy. She went sullen. Well, that's an interesting poem, full of the tension between the human gardener, in this poem, Miriam Tazewell, and nature herself or itself, or himself. Nature doing what nature does unpredictably. And it's not really that unpredictable that we would have severe storms during the month of April. Not that unpredictable at all. So it made a good ironic poem for John Crowe Ransom, and it's one that I've always really enjoyed. It has a lot of elements that I think poems need, and when they demonstrate them, I like them. So, I guess the lesson in the poem is that we cannot change what has happened by adopting a bad attitude, no matter how much it suits our mood. John Crowe Ransom has written many poems about death. I try not to carry on that tradition in my poem selection, but poets have long been attracted by sadness, heartache, and dying. I poked a bit of fun at that tendency in a poem that I wrote a number of years ago, called Poetry Lesson, which is in this book of poetry that you've seen on the screen before. But this poem is called Poetry Lesson. A certain professor was the first to warn me. Poets are serious people, but frequently dreek. And Riley added, do not dwell on the azure skies, or the love you feel for the brilliant mind, or was it something else, of your lover? Consider instead the suffering of the last czar, locked in that final basement with the hemophiliac Tsarevich, the tormented hysterical Tsarina, and her hopeless princesses. Never to consummate state marriages, but die in squalor. Good advice. Dwell on the consuming cancer of your lover, or the lost, lamentable wheeze of an unredeemable lung. Depression and vibrating angst are your tools of choice. In the belly of this beautiful world, the bowels are writhing, awaiting the poet's cut and stitch and delicate rearrangement. Well, that's kind of a ironic and not very happy poem, but it does rather limn the impetus behind a lot of poetry, not only in this day and age, but for many centuries in the past as well. Now, my friend Ruth Moss has many good poems to offer in her book Valentine, and I was attracted to this particular one because of its relationship, in some way indirect but valid, comparison with Miriam Tazewell. in the first poem we heard. But this poem, which is called Or Possibly the Queen of Lazy, introduces us to a well-known human tendency which we all have from time to time, but some of us are probably more guilty than others. The woman known as the Princess of Unfinished Business, diminished by her insistence on getting to it later, might also have been labeled, aside from the sugarcoating, euphemism, understatement, public relations spin, and other terms I hope to research someday, as a procrastinator, for instance. That's a cute, ironic poem which encapsulates a lot of meaning in very few lines. And of course, those are qualities that I find highly attractive in poets and their poetry. Well, poets are not always writing about human nature in its worst elements. Sometimes they are attracted to ordinary activities. And here's one that I want to read. I want to lighten up the calendar of poems a little bit. This is from Roy Beckmeyer's book, Stage Whispers. And it's one of the last poems in here that I turned the page down on. It's called Morning Walk. Rain can't make up its misty mind this morning. List any kind of yawning, stretching, dawning, and you'd have it right here. A song might ring out any day, sunny or not, and anyway, that bright spot of a note from the throat of a wren, or was it a sparrow, heard through my ear's narrow filter, could become half-formed, though this train of thought might be, the most perfect plum of a rainy day refrain ever sung for me. This poem is a little more complex than you might think from its title, Morning Walk. Obviously, he's taking a morning walk on a day that's threatening to rain, and he says rain can't make up its misty mind this morning. And then he talks about the bird song and how this made the day, or at least it created the best part of the walk. It was the most perfect plum of a rainy day refrain ever sung for me. The song from the throat of a wren. That's kind of a neat, non-threatening poem. And I thought, as long as we're talking about the weather or about taking a walk, there's a poem by Melissa Fite Johnson, who is a young lady who teaches high school. And all the things we read about the teachers at our schools in the big cities and the terrible things that are happening to the curricula in those schools are not really happening so much in Kansas, thank God. And we can send our kids to school with some expectation that they may get an education. And this poem by Melissa is called Something About a Walk. I feel most in love on our evening walk, sometimes padded and zipped up, others short-sleeved, my skirt hoping for a breeze to float on, sometimes tagging along with the dog, his nose nudging us, he is sure, towards the great adventure. Others, just us, winding through cul-de-sacs in good school districts, dreaming beyond our little apartment. This poem was written by Melissa when she and her husband were newly married and they would take walks. And she hadn't gotten her first job yet, but she was praising the feelings that she had on the walk. And the walk is with her husband. And she says, I feel most in love on our evening walk. That's a very friendly way to start a poem. I like that. And then towards the end, she's saying that she would like to get out of their little apartment and move up. And you can tell what she's looking forward to is winding through cul-de-sacs in good school districts. As a teacher, she would like to be in that type of school if she can possibly make it. Or at least that's my interpretation. Others might have a different interpretation. When I pulled the bookmark out of that book, it had a poem on it, and I stopped for a moment to read it. And here it is. When God made you, there was silence in heaven for 5 minutes. Then God said, how come I never thought of that before? That's my blessing for all of my audience today. And I hope you have a great week and the rest of the month of April to come. Bye now.